In this video, we're going to talk about the difference between load and no-load mutual funds. First, it's important we understand what we mean when we say the word load. And so a load is a one-time sales charge or commission that is going to be paid to the financial advisor or broker who sold you the fund to begin with. So you might be saying, well, why would anybody pay a load, or why is it? Well, if you have a financial advisor that you deal with on a regular basis and you trust that person and that person recommends this fund and you decide to purchase it, it's like a sales charge or commission for their efforts, right? Now, a no-load fund doesn't have any sales people, so basically you just approach the fund directly and say, look, I want to invest my money. They send you an application and so forth. So let's get into the pros and cons here. Let's walk through some of the mechanics and how a load would work. So let's say that you invest $25,000 with XYZ load fund. And so their load is 6.75%. And so we want to know, how is that going to affect the investment you're making? So what we do is we take the $25,000 that you're investing and we're going to multiply it by that 6.75% load. So we just take that, and that is going to equal, well, it's the same as multiplying by 0.0675. That's going to equal $1,687.50. Now you say, well, what does this mean? What does this matter? Well, that's the amount that is going to be deducted. This is going to be deducted from your investment right off the bat. Because I should have said here, we're talking about a front-end load. There's also a back-end load, which is deducted when you decide you want your money back and you no longer want to be invested in the fund. But we're going to say a front-end load is basically the upfront. This 6.75% is charged. So that means that this $25,000, we're going to deduct $1,687.50. So when we subtract that amount, that leaves us with $23,312.50. This is the amount that goes to work for you in your investment now. In that fund, you've got $23,312.50. Now, you might be thinking, hey, look, I'm paying a manager to manage this fund, and so don't all funds have expenses? Yes, there's an expense ratio for every fund, and that can vary from, it could be 1.5% of the assets that are being managed by the manager. It could be really low if it's an index fund, but this is not part of the expense ratio. Okay, this load is different. This is not the cost to have the manager manage the fund or anything like that. This is simply a sales charge or commission that's paid to that broker or that advisor, right? That's what that $1,687.50 is. And so right off the bat, you already lost money, is one way of thinking about it, right? So I just want to make sure you understand that's separate. And then also when we talk about a front-end load, sometimes they call it A shares. And then back-end, this 6.75%, if it was a back-end, it could be charged when you say, I want my investment back, right? I want the money back. I decided to withdraw my funds. That's a back end, otherwise known as B shares. And sometimes you even have like something like contingent deferred sales load, where it's basically the charge is declining maybe over a 5-year period or something. It's getting lower and lower, and then it gets to the end of 5 years, and then if you withdraw at that point, then there's no charge at all. So there's all different types of loads. So don't get too hung up on this model here. Just know whether the fund has a load or not, and then do your homework in advance. So historically, no load funds have outperformed load funds. And I just wanted to give you some of the intuition as to why that is. So let's say that you had two funds and you were looking at investing. You have one that had a front-end load of 6.75% and then one that was a no-load fund. Now let's say that you said, well, you know, this one with the load actually has a higher return. It has 12% return, whereas the no-load fund has 10% return. Okay, and you want to look at the performance of these two funds here. So let's take a look. So our initial, when we say year zero here, what I'm talking about is the beginning. So this is the start date, right? You start out with $25,000 in the no load fund because you didn't have to pay a load. But since there's a front end load in this fund over here, you start out with that $23,312.50 that we just calculated in the example before. At the end of year one, you have $26,110 in your load fund, and then you have $27,500 in the no load fund. Now, the no load fund is only returning 10%, whereas the load fund is actually returning 2% higher. Yet, we have more money in the no load fund all the way up for the first 3 years, right? You can see that the no load fund is having more money all the way up through year 3. It isn't until year 4 where finally the front end load that fund is actually has more money in it than the no load fund. Now, so takeaway from this is two things. So one, that reduction in the initial investment that bring you down to $23,312.50 off the bat, that's only worth it if the fund outperforms the no load fund. So for example, this 12%, that's higher than 10%. If this was the same, if they were both 10%, then obviously you would be better off with the no load fund. But this has to outperform the no load fund, and not only that, you have to hold on to it long enough to recoup. In this case, it was 4 years. But depending on the difference between the return of each fund, who knows, it might be 20 years that you need to hold the load fund before it would outperform the no load fund. It might even be that no matter how long you hold the load fund, it will never outperform the no load fund. So bear in mind, I'm not saying that you should never ever invest in a load fund. Some people, they like the idea of being able to talk to the financial advisor and kind of get advice and determine which fund is for them. And it's just kind of, they need a little bit of hand holding. But if you are not in that position and you're just looking at straight up returns, historically, you're better off with a no load fund.